Hi, I'm Jonathan Hafetz, and welcome to Law and Film, a podcast that explores the rich connections between law and film. Law is critical to many films. Films, in turn, tell us a lot about the law. In each episode, we'll examine a film that's noteworthy from a legal perspective. What legal issues does the film explore? What does it get right about the law? And what does it get wrong? How is law important to understanding the film? And what does the film teach us about the law and about the larger social and cultural context in which the law is embedded? Our films today are Kramer versus Kramer and Marriage Story. Kramer versus Kramer is a 1979 film written and directed by Robert Benton, starring Dustin Hoffman and Meryl Streep, with Jane Alexander in a supporting role. And Marriage Story is a 2019 film written and directed by Noah Baumbach, starring Adam Driver, Scarlett Johansson, and then in the supporting roles, three terrific actors, all playing lawyers, Alda, Ray Liotta, and Dern. The films both depict the disintegration, breakup of a marriage. They're gripping dramas on an interpersonal level. They're also dramas about the legal system and the legal process. So law plays a very big role in both films. And they are also, I think it's fair to say, reflections of their respective eras. Our guest today to talk about these two films is Solangel Maldonado. Angel is the Eleanor Bonteque Professor of Law and Associate Dean for Faculty Research and Development at Seton Hall Law School. Her research and teaching interests include family law, feminist legal theory, race in the law, and international and comparative family law. Over the last decade, her scholarship has focused on the intersection of race and family law and the law's influence on social norms of post-separation parenthood. Angel's currently working on a book that examines how the law shapes romantic preferences and how these preferences perpetuate racial hierarchy and economic and social inequality. Angel's a leading expert in this area. She's one of the reporters on the prestigious American Law Institute's Restatement of the Law, Children in the Law, which is in progress. And she's the co-editor of two textbooks on family law. She also serves on the editorial board of the American Bar Association's Family Law Quarterly. Before joining Seton Hall, Angel was a litigation associate practicing law in New York. And she also was a clerk for then District Judge Joseph A. Greenaway, who now sits on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. She received her BA from Columbia College and her JD from Columbia Law School, where she was a Harlan Fiske Stone Scholar and a managing editor of the Columbia Journal of Gender in the Law. Angel, I should add, is also my colleague at Seton Hall. She's a wonderful colleague, so it's an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to have her on Law and Film today. Welcome, Angel.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited.
So the two films, Kramer versus Kramer and Marriage Story, are filmed and made 40 years apart. 1979 for Kramer versus Kramer, and 2019 for Marriage Story. So a lot's happened in between, legally speaking. Can you set the scene a little bit?
So much has happened legally. I mean, the first thing is that in 1979, joint physical custody wasn't an option in the vast majority of jurisdictions. So that is very significant. And so when I went back and watched Kramer versus Kramer a couple of weeks ago, I kept thinking, well, wouldn't a solution have been to simply award the parents joint custody? They both loved their child very much. The child had a good relationship with both parents, but that just wasn't an option back then. So that is something that has changed. We also now recognize that fathers are incredibly important. And initially in Kramer, the father was almost portrayed as a buffoon, right? He can't even, make his child French toast in the morning. He doesn't know anything. And obviously that is very different today, right? We expect that fathers will be co-parenting as much as mothers, even though something that hasn't changed is that in most cases, mothers still have primary physical custody. So a lot has changed, but then in some areas, not that much has actually changed.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And the whole joint custody, the lack of joint custody, meaning it's kind of all or nothing when two people are fighting for custody, that shapes Kramer versus Kramer. And also to some extent, Marriage Story, even though joint custody is sort of on the table, and that was something that both parties would agree to, you have it affecting the plot because Scarlett Johansson wants to move to California and Adam Driver wants to stay in New York. So in a sense, both films are kind of made around the absence and the presence of joint custody. There's still this conflict.
Yes, I mean, I think that's right. But A Marriage Story, it would just had they not had, the 3,000 miles apart, the New York and California, then that would have been the perfect case for joint custody. And it seems that both parents were very involved with the child in parenting. They were co-parenting the child during the marriage. So it's almost like that would have been an easy case. And I wonder whether the director had to add the distance in order to add this conflict, because otherwise this would be, the case where the parents and the lawyers would all agree that joint physical custody would be workable. Let's all just stay in Brooklyn.
Yeah, you have no film, right? It would be resolved, be joint custody. It sounds like they could have worked everything out. They weren't really fighting over the money until later because it became a tool in the custody fight. They sort of needed this move and this 3,000 miles of separation. And of course, the other difference, which I can't help but remark on, is Kramer versus Kramer, set in Manhattan. He's an advertising executive, updated to Marriage Story 40 years later, set in Brooklyn. But anyway, so going to Kramer versus Kramer first, Joanna, played by Meryl Streep, abandons her child for about 15 months. And in the meantime, as you said, Dustin Hoffman, who plays Ted Kramer, proves himself to be an excellent and committed father after starting out as really a terrible father, workaholic, didn't seem to care about the kid much. And he has this very strong bond with his son. So Meryl Streep returns and tries to gain or regain custody of her son. And Dustin Hoffman, despite what's happened in the last 15 months, faces significant obstacles. So I want to play a clip of Dustin Hoffman's discussion with his lawyer when he's learning about the case and see if you can assess whether the advice is accurate that Dustin Hoffman gets from the lawyer.
I don't know the legal jargon for it, but I would think it's desertion. I mean, I don't mean to tell you your job, Mr. Shaughnessy, but I just think I have an open and shut case.
Well, first, Mr. Kramer, there's no such thing as an open and shut case where custody is involved. Well, I'm willing to bet your ex-wife has already found a lawyer, and he's advised her to move back to New York to establish residency. Now, the burden is on us to prove that your ex-wife is an unfit mother. And that means that I'll have to play rough. And if I play rough, you can bet they will too. Can you take that, Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
And it's going to cost you $15,000. That's if we win. If we go to appeal, it'll cost you more.
I understand.
Now, how old is the child again?
My son is 7.
Oh, that's tough.
Why?
Well, in most cases involving a child that young, the court tends to side with the mother.
But she signed over custody.
I'm not saying we don't have a shot, but it won't be easy. Mr. Kramer, do me a favor, will you? There's something I find very useful in matters like this. I sit down and I write out all the pros and cons on an issue. I actually write them down and look at them. I want you to do that, okay? And after that, if you're really certain you want to retain custody of your child, then we'll go in there and beat the pants off them, okay?
So, Angel, what do you make of the advice that Dustin Hoffman gets from his lawyer?
So I think it was actually accurate advice. It may be, I mean, to those of us listening to this now, in 2023, we are disappointed by a couple of things, right? So the first thing is that the lawyer himself isn't sure that Ted wants custody. I mean, the fact that he's asking him, make a list of sort of the pros and cons, and then let me know if you still want custody. Would we ask a mother that? Would we ever ask a mother to make a list and then let me know if you still want custody? But at the time, and actually not that long ago, I mean, I've been teaching 20 years and I have cases from the 1990s where judges in New York, family court judges in New York, would say to a father who was seeking custody, why do you want custody? Are you sure you want custody? And so it wasn't that long ago where we still weren't sure that why a father would want custody. But his lawyer's advice that when it's a young child, a child of what's known as a child of tender years, that judges tend to side with the mother. Yes, that was definitely true then. And it was true not that long ago. And fathers actually litigated cases throughout the country challenging the 10 years presumption as violating the Equal Protection Clause, as, sex discrimination. And so it was just understood that young children should be with their mothers because children needed their mothers. That was just sort of what was expected. And a lot less weight was given to the father.
And it's so interesting how you say that pervades the advice. You have the 10 years presumption, and that presumption is internalized by the lawyer. It's like, why do you want to go through the trouble, the expense? I mean, it turns out that Ted Kramer loses his job and gets a demotion because he has to spend so much time really being a sole parent.
Right.
So it really pervades everything.
Yeah, I mean, I thought when I was watching the film, I thought of that, how, so we talk so much about the motherhood penalty or the family penalty, and it really is the person who is a primary caregiver. If you're trying to be a parent, the careers are just not conducive to parenting. Or we know that if you're trying to take care of a child, that can have a certain impact on your career. It did in the 1970s, and women have been talking about this and writing about it for a very long time. But here we see that a father is actually affected as well. But we know that today, fathers and mothers, parents, may suffer adverse consequences in the workplace because they are parenting.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Kramer versus Kramer, it's not even subtle. I mean, it's just very clear that that's not your priority. I guess maybe today, in many employment contexts, it matters, but employers would hide it a little bit more.
Yes, they would definitely hide it a little bit more. But back then it was, why would a father be taking care of a child?
And so fast forward to the end of the case where you have the courtroom battle. And of course, spoiler alert, Meryl Streep gains full custody and Dustin Hoffman gets only visitation and has to pay maintenance and support. There was no, as you mentioned before, no joint custody options. It's all or nothing, and Meryl Streep gets everything. Insofar as the court battle is concerned, was this result accurate for the time?
I think it was definitely accurate at the time. And keep in mind, the film was sort of coming at a time when divorce rates had been increasing. It was also feminist movement, right? And so the fact that, that Meryl Streep, that, Joanna leaves because she needs to find something, some self-fulfillment, right? After going to college, but then once she got married, the expectation is that she would stay home and not have her own career. But I do believe that this was accurate. As Ted's lawyer says, we need to show that she is unfit. We need to prove that she is unfit. And so the focus, although custody cases are supposed to be decided based on the best interest of the child, the 10 years presumption was a proxy for the best interest. It was assumed that, of course, it is in the child's best interest to be with the mother unless she is unfit. And she had walked away, but she had never abused the child, and now she was willing to take on full responsibility. And so the result isn't so surprising.
What else would they have done here to assess the best interest, if at all? Was it odd that no one interviewed or asked the child what he wanted?
Now we do a lot more of having custody evaluators, and just keep in mind that a lot of us are very skeptical about the value of custody evaluators, because you're having someone who does not know the family to now try to interview the child, interview the parents, and try to make a recommendation to the court as to which custody arrangement might be best. And you can see how there might be a lot of issues with that. But now it's much more common, of course, for each of the parties to have someone who will testify on their behalf. So they'll have their own experts. And then you also have someone that's appointed by the court who will testify, who will interview the family and then, sort of make a recommendation. The court can also interview the child and assess what the child's wishes might be. But because judges don't have that much experience interviewing children, a lot of times it would be the guardian ad litem, for example, who would meet with the child and basically assess what the child wants. And we would take into account the child's wishes, but that really is for older children. I mean, here, the child, he was 7 or 8, so he was a young child. And so courts they can give some weight, but it's really up to the court to decide how much weight to give to the child's wishes, because children, what they want may not always be what's best for them.
So even today at age 7, if the guardian ad litem was appointed for Billy, the child, in Kramer, and who clearly wanted to be with his father, that still might not necessarily have carried the day.
It is not dispositive. No, it is not dispositive. It would be one consideration, one factor of many, but the court doesn't have to give it much weight at all. Now, if a child is older, in some jurisdictions by statute, if you have a child who is 12, or in other states, if a child is 14, then you absolutely have to give that child's wishes significant weight. And that is because older children, they basically talk with their feet, right? If you put a 14-year-old in a home where they don't want to be, they're gonna walk away. They're gonna make it very clear that they're not gonna stay.
Right. And then eventually they turn 18 and everything, the family court or the custody, it's no longer in the court. So
Right.
yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned before the joint custody not being an option, because that would have likely been the outcome here, some form of joint custody. And instead you get this kind of heartbreaking ending where, well, initially Dustin Hoffman loses in the court, kid's heartbroken, and then you have the final scene at the end where Meryl Streep shows up and says, here, you have him. I don't want to have custody. So it's something about this all or nothing. And without this joint custody, it seems like everyone kind of loses out.
Yes, I agree. But I want us to keep in mind that although joint custody was not a legal option in most jurisdictions, I mean, joint custody started really in the 1970s, with fathers' rights activists. But parents could always enter into their own sort of informal arrangement. So, given that Joanna was living in New York and Ted was living in New York, they could have easily had an arrangement where Billy is spending 2 nights a week or 3 nights a week with Joanna and the other days with Ted. And parents always have that ability to do that. And so I have colleagues whose parents got divorced in the 1970s and their parents had joint custody. And when I've asked them, how is that possible? The state didn't recognize it. And they said, our parents just worked something out between themselves. And so regardless of what the court ordered, they got homes near each other. We rode our bikes to the other parent's home. And so parents always have the ability to do what they believe is best for their children. And so I think that's a good way of pointing out that the law does not dictate what parents have to do if they can agree.
Yeah, so here, right, we see the outcome at the end, but who knows in real life? Dustin Hoffman might have said to Meryl Streep, well, you can come a couple of days a week, and they reach their own contractual agreement arrangement.
Exactly. Remember, the court is there when you need the court. When you can't resolve issues on your own, now you're asking a third party, a judge who doesn't know your family, to make that decision for you. I never think that that's the best outcome. And although, one thing that neither film, well, actually, A Marriage Story does bring in mediation very, very briefly, but then they end up sort of getting the big lawyers. But initially, what they had planned to do was mediate. And that might actually be a better approach because it forces people to compromise. So I guess I would have liked to have seen more in A Marriage Story of why it was that Scarlett Johansson's character, she was so opposed to mediation and really sort of quit pretty early on.
We'll get to that because I think there's a court-ordered mediation or some scene, which is a great scene over support. But I want to just one more question on Kramer versus Kramer, and we've kind of covered a little bit. But one thing that's striking about the film, 1979, it was the #1 grossing film in the U.S. and Canada that year. Swept the Oscars, best film, best director, writer. Dustin Hoffman, Meryl Streep both won acting awards. It beat out, for what it's worth, Rocky II, Alien, Star Trek, Apocalypse Now at the box office, not just the Oscars, the box office. And it's just a family drama. It's very well made, but it's kind of amazing that this was the highest grossing film of the year. Why do you think that was?
I think it was a phenomenal film. But I really think it has to do with where the culture was, right? And so much was coming together. Divorce rates were going up. This is also around the time when states were liberalizing their divorce laws. I mean, keep in mind that in New York, adultery was the only ground for divorce until 1967. And so it was in the 1970s when now, it was much easier to get divorced. And then across the country, many states were adopting no-fault divorce laws, where you no longer had to show adultery or cruelty or abandonment in order to get a divorce. So that was part of it. The other thing that I think was huge, or, really resonated with people, is that, the movie was, in a sense, sort of a feminist film, right? Joanna, who gets this amazing college education and she wants to do something with it, but she can't. It's almost like as she says, she's not allowed to both be a mother and also have her own career, even though she can obviously do both. So I think that resonated. It was also, I think, the first time that we see that fathers are really taking on a parental role, and that we see that fathers can be just as effective and caregivers as mothers. So I think all of that is coming together at a time when the country is dealing with no-fault divorce laws, the feminist movement, the increase in divorce rates, and recognizing, again, I want to go back to sort of fathers, men who are bringing in the arguments of feminists and saying, if women are going to have equal rights in the workplace, shouldn't we also have equal rights in the home and to raise our children? So I think all of that was coming together and really resonated with so much of the country.
Yeah, it does capture the zeitgeist in that sense. And I think that's why they make that shift from terrible father to great caring father. Meryl Streep seems a little complicated, I guess. I wonder where your sympathies lie, and maybe it's just a gender perception, but it seems, you feel badly for her. Your sympathies lie with her. Dustin Hoffman doesn't really care about her. He just steamrolls over her desires, her wishes. But then she kind of goes, and then she comes back, and then she says, just going to kind of take her child back after leaving for 15 months. I feel like you end up at the end, they get you kind of back on Meryl Streep having sympathy, but that's only because she gives up what she won in court.
Yeah, no, this was hard. I mean, that's the thing. I saw where both parties were coming from. So no one would say that it's acceptable for any parent to abandon their child for 15 months. But then as she explains it, you definitely understand that she was made to feel that she couldn't be a mother and also have her own interests. And it was destroying her. And so she felt that she was an inadequate mother because she wasn't satisfied to just be a mother. And so I understood why she left. And I understood that after she talked about, sort of therapy, and she understood now that there's nothing wrong with her. There was something wrong with society that was forcing her to choose between being an individual, a fully self-realized individual, and also being a mother. And that now that she understands that there's nothing wrong with her, she can actually be a great parent to her child. But in the meantime, the fact that it's all or nothing, that's a problem with society and the law. That wasn't a problem with the parents here.
That's a great point, and a film really captures that. And then, as you said before, a lot of things have changed. Talk about things that have changed and some haven't in the 40 years later when we have Marriage Story. So here we have what on the surface seems to be a better marriage. On the surface, you think it is, right? It starts off where they're each reading thoughts about the other, right? Adam Driver, who plays Charlie, reading it about Nicole, played by Scarlett Johansson. And then you realize they're actually at a marriage counseling session, and she doesn't wants to rip up everything she said. So the marriage is falling apart, although on the surface, it looks like kind of an ideal Brooklyn marriage of two upwardly mobile people in 2019. Nicole then goes to Los Angeles, where she's filming a pilot. She wanted to go back into TV. And she brings with her her son, Henry. It's supposed to be temporary, but then she decides to stay. How does that affect the situation? Nicole moving to Los Angeles, deciding to stay. What legal significance does that have?
Well, I must say that when I watched the film for the first time when it came out, I was very frustrated as a lawyer, as a law professor. I guess I wanted the film to engage more with the jurisdictional issues, which I guess that wouldn't be that interesting to most people who are not lawyers. But to me, I kept saying, well, where's the Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction Act? Like, you have to talk about this, because it was very clear that they were, as Charlie kept saying, that they were a New York family. It doesn't matter that the parties had gotten married in California, that they went to California to visit family periodically. What really matters from a legal standpoint is that the family was living in New York. New York was the child's home state. And that means that only New York courts had jurisdiction to make any child custody determinations. The film doesn't grapple with that. And so that was really problematic. But the film sort of just assumes that once she moves to California, that now the California court has jurisdiction, which it does not. But maybe that's just sort of the lawyer, the nerd in me, that found that very, very frustrating.
Well, I'm curious. I do think it gestures at the issue because there's the references, are they a New York family or an LA family, right? But maybe it gets it wrong in terms of, or misses the point about the arguments for there being a New York family. Because the idea is she moves out there, he comes out to visit, she serves him with the divorce papers, and he kind of makes the matter worse by continuing to kind of come out and visit. So it got it wrong. So they would have been treated as a New York family.
Well, and so this is where, again, the jurisdictional issues, get a little bit complicated. So she moved to California. She would need to establish that she is domiciled in California, which will allow her to now file for divorce in California. But that doesn't change the fact that New York has jurisdiction for the custody issues. And so the state that has jurisdiction to issue the divorce decree is not necessarily the same state that has jurisdiction to make a child custody order. And so in order for California to have jurisdiction to make a custody determination to address the custody case, the child would have to have moved to California and lived there for 6 months. And maybe that's what the director was sort of assuming, that they had lived in California for 6 months. It wasn't clear to me. But if the child moves to California, but there is a parent who remains in New York, Charlie remained in New York, then New York continues to be the child's home state, and it's only New York that should make that decision. But you're absolutely right that in the film, it seems that because Charlie keeps going to California, it's almost as if he is consenting to California. And then it wasn't great advice for the lawyer to tell him to basically try to establish a home in California. I mean, that goes to the substance. If the California determines that it has jurisdiction, now you're going to have to show that you have a relationship with the child and you're a good parent and you're actually going to be here. But the fact that now he has a California home really sort of defeated the jurisdictional argument, which was really the stronger argument from the very beginning.
Right. So it could have played out where they get divorced in California, but the child custody proceeding occurs in a New York court. It's not very sharp on it. I think it does dance around the point. Bert, the lawyer played by Alda, tells him first to come visit. Then he says, no, you should have filed in New York. And when Adam Driver says, let's do it, he says it's too late. It sort of seems like he gets kind of swept up. There's this question of the New York or the LA family, but the choices aren't really presented that clearly. It's interesting you mentioned the lawyer played by Alan Alda and then the other lawyers in the case. I mean, the lawyers play a significant role in the film. I mean, the acting is fantastic, I think, but they're really they play a bigger role, I think, in Marriage Story than in Kramer versus Kramer. And you kind of have the three different lawyers. You have Bert, played by Alan Alda, Charlie's first lawyer. The second lawyer, played by Ray Liotta, who's like a shark. And then Nicole's lawyer, played by Laura Dern, who's also very smooth, very good, very effective. So Alan Alda, Bert, I think you suggested maybe his advice isn't great on the legal issues, but his advice at the 30,000 foot level was basically like, they're being fairly reasonable. Let them go to California. You should move out here. They're not fighting you over the money. You're going to spend a lot of money. You're going to have a lot of aggravation, and you're going to wind up pretty much in the same place. So settle. It turns out Adam Driver doesn't take that advice. He hires Ray Liotta, who goes in, basically he says, you have your jerk. He says to his wife, you have your jerk, I need my jerk too. And he goes in and fights. And at the end, after a lot of aggravation, they do kind of end up at the same place. So I don't know. What do you think of the advice of both lawyers?
So Alan Alda's advice initially, again, going back to the jurisdictional issue, was incorrect when he says you should have filed in New York, but it's too late. Well, I don't know. Was it too late? Has it been longer than 6 months? I mean, that is the key. And every single state except for Massachusetts has adopted this statute. So Charlie should have filed in New York, and then he could have litigated in New York. However, all in all, Alan Alda was correct that at the 30,000-foot level, it was not going to make a difference. And the reason is that he says, once this is all done and over with, the two of you are going to have to parent your child. And if Nicole's living in California and Charlie's living in New York, then it doesn't matter, where the child is living. The point is, both parents are going to have to continue to parent this child, and they're going to have to find a way to make it work. And so either Nicole's going to have to come to New York, or Charlie's going to have to go to California, or the child is going to be commuting cross country. And so in the end, I think all in all, his advice was, you really need to find a way to make this work. And this is why I'm a huge fan of mediation, because rather than spending all this money on lawyers, the parents could come to an agreement with a mediator and do what's going to be best for their child, for their family, without also trying to bring out the worst of the other parent in court. That is one of the things that Ray Liotta and Laura Dern did, which I think is just so disappointing. They try to portray the other parent as unfit, try to portray Nicole as an alcoholic, try to portray Charlie as completely absent. And that's what custody battles force parents to do.
It gets ugly very fast. There's that scene where they're ready to settle. It looks like they've agreed, right? And then Laura Dern and Scarlett Johansson see Adam Driver walking down the hall with Ray Liotta, the new attorney. And Laura Dern says, it's over, it's off the table. It's a street fight now, which is what it becomes. And it gets very ugly very fast. In terms of settlement, does the Laura Dern, Nicole's lawyer, does she though push her to a more aggressive position, right? So if Nicole, Scarlett Johansson's wishes to move to California, and there's no way Adam Driver is going to agree to that voluntarily. It's very clear, he thinks of them as New York and they're going to be staying in New York. Is the only way to get to that result to do what Laura Dern says, to stay out there, file for divorce, make him come out, basically get them to be established, even if they fudge it as a LA-based family. And if they had gone into mediation, maybe right away they would have been back in New York.
Yeah, and so this is where Laura Dern, she does a great job for her client, right? And so Nicole comes to see her, and Nicole just doesn't think that she's going to have the option of staying in California, right? And she isn't even willing to allow herself to think that she can actually do this. And Laura Dern, basically says, tell me what you want. And then she basically tells her, like, this is how we can accomplish it. But in the process, what Laura Dern isn't doing is that she's not thinking about how, when this is all over, Nicole and Charlie still have to find a way to coexist and take care of their child. And so she's focused on being an advocate, which, you want to be a zealous advocate. But when we're talking about family law cases, especially custody cases, unlike commercial disputes where maybe you won't see this person again, in a custody dispute, like, this is your ex-spouse or the parent of your child. That person, you're going to be seeing them for the next how many years? You're also going to be seeing them, like, for the rest of your life when your child gets married or family events. And so that is something that I think custody lawyers need to always be aware of.
Yeah, it's really important and to point that out. And in the film, there are problems in the relationship. They point out Adam Driver had the extramarital affair, but they still have a fairly good relationship and something to build on in terms of post-divorce. There's one instance where I think Laura Dern does push it too far, and I think maybe goes beyond what Scarlett Johansson wants, which is when, after Adam Driver agrees to move to California, they're going to do 50-50 on the joint custody. But Laura Dern then gets a little bit extra. She's like, I got you 55%. It's like an extra day every month. I don't know what the math turns out to be. And it seems like it leaves a bad taste in Scarlett Johansson's mouth. She's like, I didn't want that. I don't want that. I didn't want to win, right?
Yeah, I was just very disappointed because it was the focus on winning, right? And she says, like, I got you an extra day every 2 weeks or something like that. And like, why? Laura Dern is just so focused on winning. Okay, so I'm going to get you something more. You're going to be the primary parent, the parent with primary physical custody. And what's the point of that, right? And it's, by the way, he would only have joint physical custody while he's in California, right? So while he's in New York, obviously the child would continue living with Nicole. So it's almost like the lawyer just wants to win, to be able to say, oh, I won. as opposed to we reached an agreement that made everyone happy.
Loses sight of the larger picture as effective lawyer.
Yeah.
No one seems to combine like the skills that she has with the sort of bigger picture that Alda seems to have, which might have been another way to resolve the case.
But one more thing that I want to mention is, just like I said in Kramer versus Kramer, I mean, the parties, once the court, I mean, we saw that once the court made a decision, how Joanna Kramer basically says to Ted, look, I'm not going to take custody. You take him. So she decided, whatever the court may have decided, like, I want you to have custody. Well, here, although Nicole ended up with that extra day, 55, the custody split was 55-45. At the very end, I mean, she says to Charlie, do you want to take him? And he said, it's your night. And she says, no, you take him. So she gives him back that day, even though she's entitled to 55% of the time, she's giving it back to him, regardless of what the law says.
They've come to their own terms, which is going to trump whatever the legal arrangement is. You mentioned the question of mediation, and there's a scene in the film where it looks like it's a court-supervised mediation, where they're discussing support payments. This is just after Ray Liotta comes in. Laura Dern is saying, he's got his real lawyer win for a street fight now. Then you see Laura Dern and Ray Liotta having this very friendly chat outside the courtroom. It's all friendly, where you're going to be at this party, you're going to be at this event. Then they go in and they're at loggerheads. Well, it's over everything, including the support. I want to play this clip for you and hear what your thoughts are in terms of the context and the way the support payments and the other issues are discussed.
10 years ago, Charlie takes a risk when he first hires Nicole as an actress in his play in New York City. He's a well-regarded up-and-coming director of the avant-garde. And she's known as the girl in that college sex movie who takes her top off.
My client will not be slut-shamed for an artistic choice.
And many prestigious theater roles later, she becomes an actress of great credibility. And it's because of that credibility that she's offered the lead role in a major television show. This new opportunity is thanks to Charlie. Your Honor, we shouldn't have to pay support money at this point. In fact, Charlie is entitled to half her TV money, present and future earnings of the show.
Charlie's just received the enormous sum of $650,000 in the form of a MacArthur grant. This is for the theater work he conducted during the marriage.
Installments over 5 years.
So by Jay's same logic, this is work that Nicole contributed to in numerous ways.
And to pay back debts that he's accumulated with his theater company that stars his wife.
Not only did she turn down a lucrative and successful career in movies to perform in his little theater, but she actually supplied Charlie with a loan early on to help out.
Which he paid back.
She lent her name to the marquee, which was the principal reason people came to the theater.
Well, that may have been true 10 years ago.
And in turn, she helped establish Charlie's reputation. Now, over the next 10 years, she was subsequently offered parts in movies, TV shows, most of which she turned down at Charlie's behest to be a mom and act in his plays. So while we are willing to be flexible on support, we contend that half of Charlie's grant money be split between the parties.
I don't see how you can claim that she gets half a grand dedicated to his genius.
He became a genius during the course of the marriage.
Oh, come on, Laura.
Charlie himself, upon hearing that he received the prize, told Nicole that it belonged to her too.
That's what people say when they win awards.
No, he was implying what was true. His genius was an intangible asset built during the marriage.
Nora, I like how you refer to Charlie's theater as a ramshackle downtown dump when you're arguing custody. But when you want more money, he's a big, rich, genius Broadway director. You can't have it both ways.
Really? Why not?
This is extremely well-written scene that I think triggers a lot of legal issues. What's going on here?
The first thing I want to say is I'm reminded of what an amazing actor Ray Liotta, the late Ray Liotta, was, and he passed too early. So I just want us to acknowledge that. So what we see here is two people who initially were not interested, had agreed to basically divide everything equally. They weren't trying to get spousal support. They weren't trying to get a share of what, these intangible assets, right? So the MacArthur grant, for example. But now that they're fighting over custody, what happens in other cases as well is that, well, if we're going to fight over custody, well, we're going to try to fight about everything else. And so this is the reason why sometimes people don't like lawyers very much, right? Because the real issue here, what they cared about was custody. But in a way, we're using the money, basically the marital asset, right? So his celebrity status, the MacArthur, her, Nicole's own sort of celebrity status, her contributions, we're using it sort of as a bargaining chip. I mean, that really is what's going on. And it's almost as if the clients, Charlie and Nicole, like they don't really care. This is not what they're focused on, but their lawyers are just using whatever chip that they can use to try to gain leverage. It happens a lot.
You can see their faces kind of turning as their lawyers are just turning into attack dogs for their respective clients in this scene. And thank you also for the note about Ray Liotta, a wonderful actor who did pass, unfortunately, and too early. And it was great to see him in this film towards the end of his career. It's interesting. There's a remark by one of the associates in the film about criminal lawyers see bad people at their best. Divorce lawyers see good people at their worst. The scene kind of illustrates that a little bit, although the lawyers help bring out the worst in the clients, but they've been given a task to do. It's a zealous advocacy, and they're going to do what they can to get to that end.
Absolutely. And that quote, that is just so true. I mean, it's so true that divorce lawyers see good people at their worst. I don't know if the first part of it about criminal lawyers is necessarily true, but the part about divorce lawyers seeing good people at their worst, yes, divorce brings out the worst in people a lot of times. And sometimes lawyers contribute to that.
And Marriage Story, I think, really captures those points perfectly, where you went from this situation where there was, well, what seemed a good marriage, but there was unhappiness, but there was amicability, just going into a descent into this kind of horrible situation between Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson before they revive. At the end, they walk away with at least a working relationship going forward. Looking at the two films together before we wrap up, we talked about the way things have changed, but you also mentioned about way things haven't changed. One interesting point raised by the films is the views of fathers and mothers. So at the end, when Dustin Hoffman's testifying, trying to win custody of his son, he makes an impassioned plea about why can't fathers be parents too? Fathers can be good parents, right? It's not just mothers, and fighting against what you described as basically the presumption of the tender years doctrine. And then in Marriage Story, right, even after 40 years of change and all the different legal and social and cultural changes, Laura Dern is explaining to her client, Scarlett Johansson, in the scene, she says, the idea of a good father was only invented like 30 years ago, Kramer versus Kramer time, right?
Right.
Before that, fathers were expected to be silent and absent and unreliable and selfish, right? Exactly what Dustin Hoffman was before. But then she says, but we expect mothers to be perfect, and you'll always be held to a different, higher standard.
I do believe that that is true. And many scholars have written about this. And even in my class, I sort of make the joke of cases where the father gets credit. There's a case that we cover involving a lawyer, a woman who's a partner in a named partner in a very well-known law firm in Florida. And there's a custody case between her and her husband, who was an architect. And he was unemployed at the time when they were going through the custody dispute, but they had a nanny. But the husband was getting credit for picking up the kids after school or helping them with a project. But it was the mother who was doing everything. Like in the middle of the night, the children went to her. And once she got home from work, she's the one who managed everything, who got the kids meals. But the father gets credit for, the joke is, he gets credit for pouring the kids a bowl of cereal, whereas mothers, what kind of unfit mother are you to give your kids a bowl of cereal? Like, make sure you give them a warm breakfast. So we still have double standards, absolutely. But it has gotten better. But we still hold women to different standards. And I'll just say here, I've been teaching 20 years, but I remember maybe about 10 years ago, a colleague who's a very well-known family law scholar, and we were just talking about something, and he was telling me about his love life. And he said someone had set him up on a blind date with this woman, but he wasn't going to go because she had children, but did not have custody. And I said, okay, well, so what? He said, do you know what that means? That she does not have custody of her children? If she doesn't have custody, I just don't think that she'd be a very good person. And this is a law professor who is telling me this. It's like, okay, so we still have in in our culture and even in family law professor circles, people who are making assumptions that if a mother does not have custody, there must be something wrong with her.
These assumptions and notions that are so deeply embedded in hundreds, thousands of years of especially Judeo-Christian culture just still have lasting force. It's interesting, even as the law has evolved.
Absolutely.
If you were advising on the set of Marriage Story and Noah Baumbach asked you for advice about his film, do I need to make any changes?
Well, again, I would want to just clarify the jurisdictional issues for me, and not only for me, but for other family law professors who have talked about the film. This was, it was a real point. It's like, let's make that a little bit clearer. But otherwise, I think the film was fantastically done. I guess I would have wanted more clarification about initially mediation. What is it that really turned Nicole off to mediation? Because I thought the mediator was phenomenal. Having the couple start out by writing all the things that made them fall in love with the other person. I thought that was just beautiful. And it's the way that the film ends, right? You see just how much good there was in this relationship. So I would have liked to have heard a little bit more about why she wasn't willing to mediate. Maybe it was the fact that she all along really wanted to go to California and she realized that mediation wasn't going to get her there.
Yeah, it's interesting. The film's not entirely clear about that. You can read it both ways. And yeah, I think he would have appreciated that criticism. He might have said, no, I need to get to the dramatic action. I need a conflict. So mediation, right? The movie ends after 10 minutes. But yeah, that's a great point, that opening scene in New York. And he clearly, Noah Baumbach, even if he doesn't get everything exactly right, it is definitely informed by lived experience in the legal apparatus around divorce and custody, because there's a lot of law and a lot of legal points that are fine. Yeah.
They're both two phenomenal films. I'm very happy to have done this and to have had the opportunity to go watch them again.
Yeah, Angel, thanks. It's been so great to have you on Law and Film, and the films are both available for streaming. Kramer versus Kramer is on Amazon, and Marriage Story is on Netflix. They may be on other sites as well, but you can definitely find them there. So thanks again, Angel.
Thank you so much.